The mountains do not care about your plans. They do not care about your prayers. They are ancient, indifferent slabs of granite that have watched civilizations crumble into dust. In the high country of Colorado, the air gets thin and the shadows grow long, reaching out like skeletal fingers from the base of the lodgepole pines. There is a silence there that feels heavy. A silence that rings in your ears until you start to hear things that aren't there. This is the heart of the missing 411 mystery, where the line between the natural world and something much darker begins to blur. It was October 2nd, 1999. A day when the sky was a bruised shade of blue and the wind tasted of approaching snow. A group of 11 adults gathered at the trailhead of the Big Thompson Canyon, their boots crunching on the frost-dusted earth. They were part of a Christian hiking group, people bound by faith and fellowship, stepping into the Comanche Peak Wilderness with smiles on their faces. The wilderness felt welcoming at first, but the mountain was already watching, waiting for a single moment of distraction. Among them was a 3-year-old boy named Jaryd, a burst of energy in a world of static, stone, and ancient wood. He didn't understand the gravity of the peaks or the way the ravines could swallow a sound before it even left a throat. Jaryd was a flicker of bright light, wearing a little fleece jacket, his small feet struggling to keep pace with the long strides of the adults. To him, the forest was a playground. To the forest, he was merely a curiosity, a fragile thing out of place. His eyes were wide, taking in the shimmering needles and the strange, twisted shapes of the mountain mahogany. He moved with the clumsy, joyful grace of a child, unaware that the shadows were following his every move. The adults watched him with affection, their guard lowered by the sheer beauty of the October morning. They didn't see the way the light seemed to bend around the child, or the way the birds went quiet as he passed. The trail wound upward, snaking through thickets of mountain mahogany and clusters of jagged boulders that looked like broken teeth. Jaryd wanted to run ahead, his voice high and thin in the crisp morning air, asking if he could go talk to the fishermen he thought he saw up the path. The adults looked at the trail ahead, a simple stretch of dirt visible for dozens of yards, and they said yes. It was a mistake born of comfort, a mistake that would haunt every soul in that canyon for the rest of their lives. He ran forward, his small frame bobbing with every step, the sound of his laughter trailing behind him like a dying echo. The distance was trivial, a mere 50 feet, a distance you could cover in a handful of heartbeats. He rounded a slight bend, his little shadow disappearing behind a stack of weathered stones that felt older than time itself. For a few seconds, the world was normal. The wind hissed through the pines, and the group continued their steady, rhythmic trek upward. When they rounded that same bend just moments later, the trail was empty. It was as if the earth had simply opened its mouth and swallowed the boy whole. There were no fishermen where Jaryd should have been, only the rushing water of the creek and the indifferent staring of the trees. The silence that hit the group was physical, a cold weight that settled in the pits of their stomachs. They called his name, at first with confusion, then with a rising, jagged edge of pure terror. The air seemed to grow colder in an instant, the light losing its warmth and turning a sickly, translucent gray. Every adult in the group felt the same sudden, sickening realization that the world had changed in an impossible way. They looked under rocks and behind bushes, their movements becoming frantic and disorganized as the adrenaline flooded their veins. But the trail remained a blank slate, offering no clues, no tracks, and no answers. The fishermen nearby looked up from the water, their faces blank and confused, swearing that no child had passed them. They had been sitting there for an hour, eyes fixed on the trail, and they hadn't seen a single soul move through the brush. The panic began to spread like a wildfire, the group fanning out, their voices cracking as they screamed into the vast, echoing void of the canyon. But the mountain did not scream back. It only offered the low, rhythmic hum of the wind. As the sun began to slide behind the jagged western peaks, the temperature plummeted, turning the sweat on the searchers' brows into ice. The first responders arrived with flashlights that cut weak, trembling holes into the gathering gloom of the Colorado night. They searched every crevice, every hollow log, and every dark corner of the rock faces, but found nothing. Not a footprint, Not a scrap of cloth. Not even a broken twig to mark where the boy had gone. The darkness of the canyon was absolute. A thick, velvet black that seemed to absorb the light of the torches. Every searcher felt the weight of the thousands of tons of rock above them, pressing down on their spirits. The radio chatter was a series of static bursts and frustrated reports. A symphony of failure echoing through the trees. Somewhere in that darkness, a 3-year-old was alone. Or worse, he wasn't alone at all. The bloodhounds were brought in, their powerful noses pressed to the cold, unforgiving ground, searching for any hint of Jaryd's scent. But the dogs acted strangely, their hackles rising as they whimpered and paced in tight, frantic circles. They would pick up a trail for a few feet and then stop dead, staring into the dark woods with a look of primal fear in their eyes. It was as if the boy's scent had simply ascended into the atmosphere, or had been wiped away by something that knew how to hide. The handlers struggled with the leashes, their own nerves frayed by the behavior of their highly trained animals. A dog's nose doesn't lie, but it can be overwhelmed by something that shouldn't exist in the natural order. The hounds refused to cross certain invisible lines, digging their claws into the dirt and howling at the empty air. It was a warning that the humans were too slow to understand. A message written in the language of instinct. The first night in the wilderness is a descent into a special kind of hell for those left behind. The searchers sat around small, flickering fires, feeling the weight of the forest press in on them from all sides. Every snap of a branch sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of the dry leaves felt like a hand reaching out from the dark. There was a feeling of being observed by something that didn't use eyes, something that moved within the gaps between the trees. The stars above were cold and distant, offering no comfort to the men and women huddled in the canyon floor. They spoke in whispers, as if loud voices might draw the attention of whatever was lurking in the shadows. The firelight cast long, dancing shapes against the rock walls, shapes that seemed to shift and grow when no one was looking. It was a night of long, agonizing hours, where every second felt like a year of waiting. Years passed, and the name Jaryd Atadero became a ghost story whispered in the halls of the Park Service. His father never stopped looking, his face growing lined and weary, his eyes reflecting the jagged silhouette of the peaks that had stolen his son. He walked those trails until his boots wore thin, searching for an answer in a place that only gave questions. The world moved on, but for the father, time had frozen on that October morning in 1999. The seasons bled into one another, the snows of winter burying the canyon and the heat of summer baking the granite. Every year, the father returned to the spot where his life had been torn apart, a solitary figure moving through a landscape of grief. He became a fixture of the wilderness, a man who had more in common with the trees and the stones than with the world of men. He was waiting for the mountain to speak, for the silence to finally break. Then, in June of 2003, the mountain finally decided to cough up a piece of the truth. 2 hikers were scrambling off trail, far above the path where Jaryd had vanished, moving through terrain that few humans ever touched. They saw something white and jarring against the dark brown of the pine needles and the gray of the granite. It was a tooth, and near it, a small fragment of a human skull, bleached white by the harsh alpine sun. The location of the discovery sent a chill through the investigators that no mountain wind could match. The remains were found 550 feet above the trail, perched on a steep, treacherous incline that would challenge an experienced climber. There is no logical way a 3-year-old boy, with his short legs and limited stamina, could have navigated that vertical nightmare. He would have had to crawl through dense, thorny brush and scale sheer rock faces in the middle of a freezing night. To reach that spot, a child would have had to possess the strength and agility of a mountain goat. There were no paths, no clearings, just a brutal ascent through obstacles that would trip up a grown man in broad daylight. The investigators stood on the ridge, looking down at the impossible distance, their brows furrowed in disbelief. The math simply didn't add up, and the physics of the mountain screamed of an outside force. When they found his clothing nearby, the mystery shifted from tragic to utterly inexplicable. His little fleece jacket and his tiny pants were found lying on the ground, but they were turned inside out. They weren't scattered by animals or torn by the elements. They were placed there, almost as the fabric was in remarkably good condition, showing very little of the wear and tear you would expect after 4 years in the brutal Colorado wilderness. The blue of the jacket was still vibrant, the zippers still functional, the fibers untainted by the passage of time. It was as if the clothing had been kept in a vacuum, protected from the rain, the snow, and the hungry teeth of scavengers. How could a fleece jacket lie in the open for 4 years and not become a tattered, sun-bleached rag? The answer felt like a cold hand pressing against the base of the skull. There is a theory among those who study the missing 411 cases. A theory of a shimmer, a displacement in the very fabric of reality. It is as if some predatory force can pluck a person from our world and hold them in a place where time and decay do not function the same way. When the mountain is finished with them, it drops them back into our world, often in places they could never have reached on their own. It is a predator that doesn't just hunt for meat, but for the very essence of a human life. This entity, this shadow in the trees, doesn't operate by our understanding of biology or physics. It leaves behind trophies that are intended to be found, puzzles that mock our need for closure. The inside-out clothing is a recurring theme, a signature of something that unravels the human form in a way that is both clinical and terrifying. It is as if the victim was stepped out of their own skin, leaving the garments behind like a discarded husk. This is not the only time the Comanche Peak Wilderness has claimed a soul in such a bizarre and terrifying fashion. Years earlier, a young boy named Bobby Bizup vanished from a nearby camp, only for his remains to be found years later in a similarly impossible location. Both cases share the same hallmarks: the sudden disappearance, the failed tracking dogs, and the eventual discovery of remains in high, inaccessible places. It suggests a pattern that defies conventional explanation, a pattern written in the blood and bone of the innocent. The similarities are too precise to be a coincidence, a mirror image of tragedy that spans across decades. Bobby was there, and then he was gone, just like Jaryd, leaving behind a vacuum that no search party could fill. Their remains were found at elevations that mocked the physical limitations of their young bodies. It is a grim testament to the fact that something in these woods has a specific taste for the small and the defenseless. The mountains are beautiful, yes, but they are also hungry, and they have a memory that spans eons. When you walk into the high country, you are walking into a kingdom that does not recognize your laws or your logic. Always stay on the trail. Always keep your loved ones within arm's reach. And never, ever assume that you are the top of the food chain. Because, in the silence of the Rockies, something is always watching. And it is always patient. The peaks do not offer forgiveness. Only the cold comfort of the stone and the endless cycle of the seasons. We are intruders in their domain, fragile creatures of meat and bone walking through a world of iron and ice. Every time you turn your back on the trail, you are rolling the dice with an entity that has been playing the game since the dawn of time. Respect the wild, or it will teach you a lesson that you will not survive to repeat. The case of Jaryd Atadero remains a jagged scar on the history of the national parks, a reminder of the fragility of our existence. We like to think we understand the world, but there are pockets of shadow where the old rules still apply. Somewhere up there, in the thin air and the jagged rock, the mountain still holds its secrets close to its chest, and the wind continues to howl through the Big Thompson Canyon. A sound that is not quite the breeze, but the echo of a laugh that was silenced far too soon. The files are never truly closed. They only grow dusty in the basements of government buildings. But for those who know the truth, the files are alive, pulsing with the unanswered questions of 1,000 missing souls. Jaryd's story is a chapter in a book that is still being written, a book whose ending we may never want to read. The peaks stand silent, their secrets locked away behind ramparts of granite and curtains of snow. The shadows are getting longer now, and the sun is dipping below the horizon, casting a deep, blood-red glow over the peaks. It is time to pack up and head back to the safety of the valley, away from the prying eyes of the tree line. But as you walk, you might feel a prickle on the back of your neck, a feeling that you are being followed by something you cannot see. Do not look back. Just keep walking. and hope that the mountain has already had its fill for the day. We spend our lives building walls and cities to keep the wild at bay. But the wild is always there, waiting at the edge of the porch light. It is a vast, cold intelligence that doesn't need to speak to be understood. The story of Jaryd is a story of that intelligence reaching out and claiming what it wanted without effort or explanation. It is a story that ends in a tooth and a scrap of cloth, and a father's heart that will never be whole again. The next time you find yourself in the high country, listen to the silence. Really listen. You might hear the distant call of a bird, or the rustle of a marmot in the rocks. But beneath that, there is a low, vibrating hum that seems to come from the earth itself. It is the sound of the mountain breathing, and it is a sound that should make you very, very afraid. Stay safe out there, because the wilderness doesn't care if you're found. The missing 411 cases continue to grow, a ledger of the lost that defies every attempt at a rational solution. From the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the granite peaks of the East Coast, people are vanishing into thin air. We look for patterns in the weather, the geography, and the timing, but the only true pattern is the mystery itself. It is a puzzle with pieces that don't fit, a map that leads to nowhere but the dark. In the end, we are all just guests in a world that was here long before us and will be here long after we are gone. We walk on the surface of a giant that is only beginning to wake up and notice our presence. The story of Jaryd Atadero is a warning whispered from the peaks of Colorado to anyone who will listen. The mountain takes, the mountain hides, and only rarely. The mountain gives back. Keep your eyes on the tree line and your feet on the path. The world is much larger and much stranger than you can possibly imagine. The air is getting colder now, and the first stars are beginning to pierce the velvet black of the night sky. It is time to go, before the shadows become more than just shadows, and the silence becomes permanent.